Congratulations, Ms. Powell. All 4 heartbeats are strong. Please schedule your follow-up appointment immediately. This is a high-risk pregnancy requiring specialized care. Dr. Sandra Clark, Reproductive Endocrinology. The message arrived at 2:47 a.m., the blue light from Amara Powell's phone cutting through the darkness of her modest one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. She'd been awake anyway, had been for hours, the nausea that plagued her lately making sleep impossible. Amara's hand trembled as she swiped to the attached ultrasound image. 4 distinct sacs, 4 tiny flickering heartbeats captured in grainy black and white. 4 babies. She pressed her palm against her mouth, stifling the sound that wanted to escape, something between a laugh and a sob. 4 children. The very thing Ethan Rothwell had spent 3 years of their marriage telling her she'd never give him. The reason he'd cited in interviews after filing for divorce, his cold blue eyes meeting the camera with that expression of long-suffering patience that made her want to scream. Sometimes 2 people simply aren't compatible, he'd told the journalist from Forbes, his hand resting possessively on the lower back of Sienna, his 23-year-old model girlfriend. I wanted a family. Amara wanted other things. The lie had spread through their social circles like poison. Amara, the selfish wife who put her nonprofit work above giving her successful husband children. Amara, the woman who couldn't fulfill the most basic expectation of marriage. Amara, fundamentally broken in some essential way. She'd let him control that narrative because fighting it would have meant revealing the truth, that Ethan had refused couples fertility testing, had blamed her exclusively, had grown increasingly cold and cruel with each negative pregnancy test until being near him felt like drowning in ice water. That was 6 months ago. 6 months since she'd signed the divorce papers with shaking hands, taking almost nothing in the settlement because she just needed to escape. 6 months since she'd rebuilt her life from scattered pieces, taking on consulting work for nonprofits, living in this tiny apartment that was hers and hers alone. 6 months since the night that had apparently changed everything. Amara set the phone down and pressed both hands against her still flat stomach. 7 months ago, to be precise. The night before the divorce was finalized. The night Ethan had shown up at her door with bourbon on his breath and something desperate in his eyes. "I don't want to sign them," he'd said, swaying slightly in her doorway. "Tell me not to sign them, Amara." She should have closed the door, should have protected herself. Instead, she'd let him in, and they'd fallen into each other with the kind of desperate intensity that comes from 3 years of slow death and final goodbyes. It had felt like an ending, one last moment of the passion that had brought them together before reality reasserted itself. He'd signed the papers the next morning without a word, his jaw tight and eyes avoiding hers. 2 weeks later, his engagement to Sienna had been announced in Page 6. Now, Amara sat alone in the darkness, pregnant with quadruplets from a man who'd publicly humiliated her, who was planning a wedding to someone else, who had no idea his entire narrative was about to explode in his face. Her phone buzzed again, a text from her best friend, Keisha Washington. "Girl, you better be asleep. Call me first thing, okay? I made you that ginger tea recipe." Amara smiled despite everything. Keisha had known something was wrong 2 weeks ago when Amara couldn't even look at coffee without gagging. 41, married with 2 teenage sons, Keisha had recognized the signs immediately. "You need to take a test," she'd said firmly, grabbing Amara's hand across the table at their favorite brunch spot in Fort Greene. "And before you say it's impossible, I saw the way you looked when Ethan's engagement was announced. Something happened." The pregnancy test had been positive, the second one too, and the third. The blood test at her doctor's office had confirmed it, but Dr. Clark had insisted on an ultrasound to establish dates and rule out multiples. Rule out multiples. Amara almost laughed at the memory. She pulled up her email and began typing a response to Dr. Clark, her consultant's brain taking over, even as her emotions churned. High-risk pregnancy, specialized care, the medical bills alone would be astronomical. Her basic health insurance through the freelancer marketplace wasn't going to cover what 4 babies would require, which meant she'd eventually have to tell Ethan. Not because she wanted anything from him, but because these were his children. He had a right to know, even if the knowledge destroyed the tidy story he'd constructed about their failed marriage. The thought of his face when he found out filled her with a complicated mixture of vindication and dread. Vindication, because the truth would finally be undeniable. Dread, because Ethan Rothwell didn't do anything halfway, and once he knew about these babies, he would try to control everything. Amara looked at the ultrasound image again, zooming in on each tiny heartbeat. 4 children. 4 chances at the family she desperately wanted. 4 lives that would link her to Ethan forever, whether either of them liked it or not. Her phone buzzed with a calendar notification. 9 a.m., meeting with Rothwell Properties, or Community Development Project. Amara's stomach dropped. She'd forgotten. 3 weeks ago, her consulting firm had been approached by Rothwell Properties about a major community development initiative in the South Bronx. It was the kind of project that could establish her reputation, prove she was more than Ethan Rothwell's ex-wife. She'd never imagined Ethan would be personally involved. He had hundreds of projects running simultaneously. But the follow-up email that had arrived yesterday had made it clear Ethan wanted to oversee this one himself. Something about ensuring proper community engagement and personal investment in the project's success, which meant in approximately 6 hours she'd be sitting across a conference table from the father of her quadruplets, pretending everything was normal while 12 weeks of pregnancy hormones raged through her system and the truth sat like a bomb between them. Amara closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She'd survived 3 years of marriage to Ethan Rothwell. She'd survived the divorce and the public humiliation. She'd survived this too. She just had to figure out how to look him in the eye without either crying or throwing her coffee in his face. The Rothwell Properties headquarters occupied the top 15 floors of a glass tower in Hudson Yards, all steel and sharp edges and carefully curated luxury. Amari had been here countless times during their marriage, but walking through the lobby now felt different. She was a visitor, a consultant, someone who needed to sign in and wait for an escort. Ms. Powell, a young woman in an immaculate navy suit, approached with a professional smile. "I'm Jenna, Mr. Rothwell's executive assistant. He's ready for you in the conference room." Amara followed her to the elevator, hyper-aware of the way her pencil skirt sat slightly tighter than it had 2 weeks ago. At 12 weeks, she wasn't showing yet, but her body was changing in subtle ways. Her breasts were tender and fuller. Her face had a slight roundness that might be bloating or might be the beginning of pregnancy glow. She'd dressed carefully this morning, gray suit, ivory blouse, her natural curls pulled back in a professional bun. Armor, that's what Keisha called her work clothes, protection against the world and, today specifically, against Ethan. The conference room overlooked the Hudson River, morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. 3 people sat around the massive table, 2 men in their 30s she didn't recognize, and Ethan. He stood when she entered, and the simple courtesy felt like mockery. Ethan Rothwell in his element, 6'2", perfectly tailored charcoal suit, dark blonde hair styled with careful casualness, those sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He had always been handsome in a cold, patrician way. Strong jaw, aristocratic nose, the kind of face that looked good on magazine covers and made subordinates nervous. Amara. Her name in his mouth sounded different than it used to, more formal, more distant. "Thank you for coming. Mr. Rothwell." She kept her voice level, professional. "I'm looking forward to discussing the project." Something flickered across his face. Surprise? Irritation? Before the mask slipped back into place. "Please sit. This is David Lawrence, our head of community development, and Marcus Torres, project manager for the Bronx Initiative." The meeting should have been straightforward. Rothwell Properties wanted to redevelop a 6-block area in the South Bronx, and they needed someone who understood community engagement, who could navigate the complicated politics of gentrification and displacement. Amara's work with affordable housing nonprofits made her the obvious choice. But having Ethan in the room changed everything. She felt his attention on her like a physical weight as she walked through her proposed strategy, outlining stakeholder meetings and community benefit agreements and local hiring requirements. "You're suggesting we commit to 50% affordable units," Ethan said, his fingers steepled in that way he had when he was about to demolish someone's argument. "That's not financially viable for a project of this scope." It's not financially viable if you're expecting the same profit margins as your luxury developments, Amara countered, meeting his eyes directly. But this project was pitched as community development, not wealth extraction. If that's changed, I should know now. David and Marcus exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the tension crackling across the table. Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Your passion for the community is admirable. It's what made you good at your non-profit work. But business requires pragmatism. And humanity requires ethics. Amara kept her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest. This was so typically Ethan, framing compassion as naive, treating profit as the only metric that mattered. If you're not interested in actually benefiting the community, hire a different consultant. She gathered her materials, prepared to walk out. The project would have been good for her business, but she didn't need this. Didn't need Ethan's condescension or the complicated mess of working with him while hiding quadruplets. Wait, Ethan's voice stopped her. You're right. Amara froze, her hand on her briefcase. In 3 years of marriage, she'd never heard those words from him. The project should prioritize community benefit, he continued, his expression unreadable. David, work with Ms. Powell to revise the affordable housing percentage, whatever she thinks is appropriate within reason. Marcus, make sure she has access to all the financials. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with precise movements. Amara, a word in my office. It wasn't a question. David and Marcus quickly excused themselves, leaving her alone with Ethan in the suddenly too small conference room. I don't think that's necessary, Amara said. We can communicate through email about, please. The word came out rougher than his usual controlled tone. 5 minutes. Against her better judgment, she followed him down the hallway to the corner office that had once been as familiar to her as her own home. Nothing had changed. The same modern furniture, the same view of the Hudson, the same photograph of his parents on the E2 credenza, conspicuously not including any photos of Amara. Ethan closed the door and turned to face her, and for a moment, the mask slipped entirely. He looked tired, older than 42. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there during their marriage. You look good, he said quietly. Different, but good. Amara crossed her arms, defensive. Is that what you wanted to tell me? No, I wanted to... He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. I wanted to apologize for how I've been handling things. The engagement announcement, the interviews. It was petty. Petty. The word came out flat. You told the world I was selfish and broken, that I couldn't give you what you wanted, and now you're calling it petty? I was angry, Ethan said, his jaw tightening. I felt betrayed. Betrayed? Amara's voice rose despite her intention to stay calm. You refused to get tested. You blamed me for 3 years. You made me feel like I was failing at being a woman because I couldn't get pregnant. And when I suggested we see a specialist together, you told me I was making excuses for my inadequacy. I know. The admission seemed to cost him something. I know I was wrong about that. Do you? Amara stepped closer, anger overriding caution. Because from where I'm standing, you're about to marry a woman young enough to be your daughter, probably because you're convinced she'll give you the children I supposedly couldn't. Have you considered that maybe the problem wasn't me? The words hung between them, sharp and dangerous. Ethan's face went pale, then flushed with color. What are you saying? Amara caught herself. This wasn't how she'd wanted this conversation to go. She'd planned to tell him about the pregnancy carefully, with Keisha present for support, in a neutral location where she could control the narrative. Nothing, she said, stepping back. I'm not saying anything. This was a mistake. I'll send David my revised proposal, but I think it's best if we communicate through intermediaries from now on. She moved toward the door, but Ethan's hand shot out, catching her wrist. Not hard, not restraining, just enough to stop her movement. Amara, wait. I'm trying here. I know I was a terrible husband. I know I hurt you in ways that probably can't be fixed, but seeing you today, working with you, I remembered why I married you in the first place. His thumb brushed against her pulse point, and Amara hated that her body responded, that after everything, some part of her still recognized his touch. You married me because I was different from the society women your parents kept introducing you to. Amara said softly. Because I challenged you and didn't care about your money. But then you spent 3 years trying to make me into someone else, someone quieter, someone who didn't question you. I was scared, Ethan said, and the raw honesty in his voice surprised her. Scared that you were too good for me. That eventually you'd realize you'd married an asshole who didn't deserve you. So I pushed you away first. Amara looked up at him, at the man she'd loved and hated in almost equal measure. At 12 weeks pregnant with his quadruplets, while he planned a wedding to someone else. The situation would be funny if it wasn't so devastating. Let me go, Ethan, she said quietly. You're engaged. I'm moving on. We can be professional, but this, she gestured between them, this is over. His hand dropped from her wrist and something like pain crossed his face. Right. Of course. I'm sorry I should go. Sienna's probably wondering where I am. The mention of his fiancée should have made Amara relieved. Instead, it made the nausea that had plagued her all morning surge with new intensity. She pressed her hand to her mouth, willing herself not to be sick in Ethan's office. Are you okay? His voice sharpened with concern. You look pale. I'm fine, just need some air. She escaped his office before he could press further, making it to the women's restroom down the hall just in time. Morning sickness, the books called it, though Amara had learned it could strike any time of day, especially when stressed. When she emerged from the stall, pale and shaking, she found Jenna standing by the sinks with a bottle of water. Mr. Rothwell asked me to check on you, the assistant said, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes kind. He's concerned. I'm fine, Amara lied, accepting the water gratefully. Just something I ate. Jenna nodded, but there was something in her expression that made Amara wonder what the young woman knew or suspected. How many of Ethan's assistants had seen his marriage crumble? How many had watched him move on to Sienna while Amara was erased from the company's history? He's not sleeping, Jenna said suddenly, lowering her voice. Since the engagement, he comes in at 5 a.m. and works until midnight. Miss Sienna calls constantly, and he always sounds hollow. I shouldn't be telling you this, but I worked for you both. You were always kind to me, and he's been different since the divorce. Harder. Meaner. Amara didn't know what to do with this information, didn't want the complication of knowing Ethan was suffering, of imagining him working himself to exhaustion while planning a wedding he apparently didn't want. That's not my problem anymore, she said gently, but thank you for checking on me. She left the building quickly, texting her Uber before she'd even reached the lobby. Only when she was safely in the back seat, watching Hudson Yards disappear behind her, did she let herself process what had happened. Ethan wanted to apologize, wanted to reconnect, was apparently miserable in his new relationship. And she was pregnant with his quadruplets, a secret that would destroy whatever fragile peace they'd just established. Her phone buzzed with a text from Keisha. How did it go? Did you tell him? Amara typed back. It was complicated. Meeting at yours tonight? I need to talk. The response came immediately. Already making your favorite, 7 p.m. And girl, you're telling him soon. This secret is eating you alive. Amara pressed her hand against her stomach, thinking of the 4 heartbeats growing inside her. Keisha was right. She had to tell him. The question was when and how, and whether she was strong enough to survive what came after. A week later, Amara stood in Dr. Clark's office, staring at a much clearer ultrasound image. At 13 weeks, the babies were starting to look less like abstract blobs and more like tiny humans. 4 heads, 8 arms, 8 legs, 4 hearts beating in synchronized rhythm. Everything looks excellent, Dr. Clark said, her voice warm with the kind of enthusiasm that made Amara both grateful and terrified. All 4 are measuring right on schedule. Baby A is in the most favorable position, which is typical for quads. We'll want to start weekly monitoring soon, and I'm going to recommend you begin working from home by week 20 if possible. The risk of preterm labor is significant with multiples. I'm a consultant, Amara said. Most of my work is already from home. Good. That'll make things easier. Now, have you thought about who will be your support system during the pregnancy? Partner? Family? High-risk pregnancies require a strong network. Amara's throat tightened. My best friend is extremely supportive, and my grandmother lives nearby. What about the father? Dr. Clark asked gently. I know you said the relationship is complicated, but with 4 babies on the way, you'll need all the help you can get. Before Amara could answer, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. They'd been texting about the Bronx project all week, professional exchanges about community meetings and financing structures. He'd been respectful, even deferential to her opinions. It had been so strange to interact with this version of Ethan, the one who listened, who admitted when he didn't know something, who seemed genuinely interested in doing right by the community. It made hiding the pregnancy feel worse somehow. "I need to take this," Amara said to Dr. Clark. "Work call." She stepped into the hallway, taking a deep breath before answering. "Ethan, are you busy tonight?" His voice sounded different, less controlled. "I need to talk to you, not about work. About other things." Amara's heart raced. "What other things? Can we meet? Somewhere neutral. That coffee place you liked in Brooklyn, if it's still around." Blue Bottle on Berry Street. They'd gone there on their 3rd date, back when Ethan was just an attractive real estate developer who made her laugh, before she knew about the Rothwell family fortune or the expectations that came with marrying into old money. "I don't think that's a good idea," Amara said carefully. "You're engaged, Ethan. We should keep things professional." "I'm not engaged anymore." The words hit like a physical blow. "What?" "I broke it off with Sienna 2 days ago. It wasn't fair to her marrying her when—" He paused. "Can we meet, please? I'll explain everything." Amara looked back through the window at Dr. Clark's office, at the ultrasound images still displayed on the screen. 4 babies. 4 reasons this conversation was about to become infinitely more complicated. 8 o'clock, she heard herself say. Blue Bottle. "Thank you," Ethan said, and there was something raw in his voice that made her chest ache. "I'll see you tonight." After the call ended, Amara stood in the hallway, hand pressed against her stomach. She had to tell him. Tonight. No more delays, no more excuses. He'd ended his engagement, and she was carrying his children. He deserved to know the truth, regardless of what it meant for both of their lives. "Ms. Powell," Dr. Clark had stepped into the hallway. "Are you all right?" "That was the father," Amara said quietly. "I'm telling him tonight." Dr. Clark nodded sympathetically. "Would you like me to prepare any materials for him? Sometimes partners find the medical information helpful." Partners? The word felt wrong. They weren't partners. They were exes who'd made a catastrophic mistake. "Yes, that would be helpful. Thank you." She left the office with a folder full of ultrasound images, information about high-risk multiple pregnancies, and a prescription for prenatal vitamins specifically formulated for quad pregnancies. In her purse, 4 tiny heartbeats captured in black and white, ready to destroy whatever tentative peace she and Ethan had constructed. Keisha called as Amara was walking to the subway. "Hey, how'd the appointment go?" "All 4 are healthy, growing normally." Amara paused at the top of the stairs, suddenly overwhelmed. "Ethan broke up with Sienna. He wants to meet tonight." "Oh, shit." Keisha's voice went sharp with concern. "Are you telling him?" "I have to. It's been too long already. But, Keisha, what if he tries to take them? What if he sues for custody or tries to force me to move back into his place or—" "Breathe," Keisha interrupted firmly. "First of all, you're borrowing trouble. Second, you're the one carrying these babies. You have rights. And third, maybe he's changed. People can change, Amara. Ethan doesn't change. He controls. Then you set boundaries. You tell him the truth and make it clear what your expectations are. You're not the woman who let him walk all over you anymore. You're a woman who rebuilt her entire life after he tried to destroy it. He doesn't get to control this." Amara closed her eyes, letting Keisha's words sink in. She was right. The woman who'd signed those divorce papers 6 months ago, who'd walked away from Ethan's money and influence, who'd started over with nothing but her skills and determination, that woman could handle telling her ex-husband about quadruplets. "I'll call you after," Amara said. "And Keisha, thank you for everything. That's what best friends are for. Now go knock him on his ass with those quadruplets. I'll be waiting by the phone with ice cream and moral support." Blue Bottle looked exactly as Amara remembered. Exposed brick, warm lighting, the smell of fresh coffee mixing with the scent of old books from the used bookstore next door. It had been their spot during the early days of dating, when Ethan was still trying to impress her with his knowledge of Brooklyn's independent coffee scene. He was already there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups in front of him. He stood when he saw her, and the simple courtesy still felt jarring from a man who'd spent their last year of marriage barely looking at her. "Decaf latte," he said, gesturing to one of the cups. "Your usual, or at least what it used to be." Amara sat down, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. The gesture was thoughtful, in a way that reminded her of the man she'd fallen in love with before marriage and fertility struggles had turned him into someone she didn't recognize. "You said you wanted to talk," she prompted, needing to control this conversation before her courage failed. Ethan leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. "I made a mistake. With Sienna, with the divorce, with everything. I've spent 6 months trying to convince myself I was right, that our marriage failed because we wanted different things. But working with you this week, seeing you again, I remembered the truth. Which is, that I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too proud to admit I might be wrong." He reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers without quite touching. "I was the problem, Amara. Not you. Never you." Amara's throat tightened. These were words she'd needed to hear 3 years ago, when she was drowning in self-doubt and wondering if she was fundamentally broken. Hearing them now felt both validating and too late. "What changed?" she asked. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because Sienna asked me if I loved her." Ethan's jaw tightened. "We were talking about the wedding, and she asked me directly, 'Do you love me?' And I couldn't lie to her. She deserves better than being a replacement for something I lost." "And what did you lose exactly?" "You." The word came out rough. "I lost you. And I need to know if there's any chance, any possibility that you could forgive me, that we could try again." Amara pulled her hand back, needing space to think. This was the moment. She had to tell him now before this conversation went any further. "Ethan, there's something you need to know. Something that changes everything." He went very still, his expression shifting to something cautious. "What is it?" She pulled the folder from her bag, her hands shaking slightly. Inside were the ultrasound images, the medical information, the undeniable proof that their story wasn't over. 7 months ago, the night before we signed the divorce. "Papers? You came to my apartment," she said, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "Do you remember?" "Of course I remember." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I've thought about it every day since." "So have I, because that night had consequences." She slid the folder across the table. "I'm pregnant, Ethan. 13 weeks. And it's not just one baby." He opened the folder with hands that had gone unsteady, his eyes scanning the ultrasound images. She watched his face as a comprehension dawned, the 4 distinct forms, the medical notes indicating multiples, the dates that made paternity undeniable. 4, he said, his voice hollow. "You're pregnant with 4 babies. Quadruplets, all healthy, growing normally. High-risk pregnancy, but Dr. Clark says the prognosis is good if I follow protocols." Ethan looked up at her, and the expression on his face was impossible to read. Shock, disbelief, something that might have been joy or might have been terror. "When were you going to tell me?" The question came out sharp. "Or were you planning to hide it, raise my children without me ever knowing?" "I found out 10 days ago," Amara said, keeping her voice steady despite the accusation in his tone. "I was planning to tell you, but I needed time to process. This isn't exactly a simple situation." 10 days. He stood abruptly, pacing away from the table. "You've known for 10 days that I'm going to be a father, and you said nothing. While I sat in meetings with you, while we texted about work, while I—" He broke off, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration she remembered too well. "You were engaged," Amara said, anger rising to match his. "You were planning a wedding to someone else. Was I supposed to drop this news on you while you were picking out china patterns with Sienna?" "Yes," he spun to face her. "Yes, you should have told me immediately. These are my children, Amara, mine. You don't get to make decisions about them without me." And there it was. The control issues that had destroyed their marriage, reasserting themselves at the first opportunity. Amara stood, grabbing her bag. This was a mistake. I shouldn't have told you here. Shouldn't have. Don't. Ethan crossed the space between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to cup her face. Don't run, please. I'm sorry. I'm processing badly, but please don't run. Amara froze, caught between the impulse to flee and the magnetic pull of his proximity. His thumbs brushed against her cheekbones, and the tenderness of the gesture contrasted sharply with the intensity in his eyes. 4 babies, he said softly. 4 chances at everything we wanted. How is this real? I don't know, Amara admitted, but it is. They're real, and they're coming, and we need to figure out how to navigate this. Move in with me. What? No, absolutely not. You'll need help, medical care, support, someone to control every aspect of the pregnancy. Amara stepped back, breaking contact. No, I'm not doing this again, Ethan. I'm not letting you take over my life because you think you know best. That's not what I'm trying to do. But his jaw was tight, his shoulders tense. But you can't possibly handle this alone. 4 babies, Amara. Do you have any idea what that means? The medical costs alone? I'm aware of the costs. I'm also aware that I survived 38 years without you managing my life, and I'll survive this too. They stared at each other across 3 feet of coffee shop floor, the battle lines already being drawn. Amara could see him trying to control the impulse to dominate the conversation, to lay out his plan and expect her to fall in line. I want to be involved, Ethan said finally, his voice more measured. I want to come to appointments, help with preparations, be there for you through this, but I'm hearing that you don't want that. I want help, not control. There's a difference. Then teach me the difference. He moved closer again, his expression earnest. I know I was terrible at boundaries during our marriage. I know I tried to manage everything because I was scared of losing control. But I'm asking you to give me a chance to do this better. Amara studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda, but all she saw was raw honesty and something that looked like fear. We need rules, she said. Clear boundaries. I make the final decisions about my medical care, where I live, how I work. You can be involved, but you don't get to dictate. Agreed. And we're not getting back together. This doesn't mean we're trying again. Something flickered across his face. Disappointment? Pain, before he nodded. Understood. Co-parents, nothing more. Co-parents, Amara echoed, the word feeling strange in her mouth. They'd never managed to be good spouses. Could they possibly learn to be effective co-parents? Ethan pulled out his phone. When's your next appointment? I want to be there. Next week, Wednesday at 10. But Ethan, if you come, you're there to support, not to interrogate my doctor or try to override my decisions. I'll be on my best behavior. He managed a weak smile. Scout's honor. You were never a scout. No, but I'm learning humility late in life. He pocketed his phone and looked at her with an expression that made her heart ache. 4 babies, Amara. You're giving me 4 children. I know I don't deserve this gift, but I swear I'm going to do everything I can to be worthy of it. Amara wanted to stay angry, wanted to maintain the defensive walls that had protected her through 6 months of rebuilding. But the way he was looking at her, like she'd handed him the world when he expected nothing, made those walls start to crack. Don't make promises you can't keep, she said softly. Just show up, be consistent, that's all I need. I can do that. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed his palm against her still flat stomach. 4 babies, our babies, this is real. The touch was intimate in a way that had nothing to do with passion and everything to do with shared potential. Amara covered his hand with hers, and for a moment they stood connected by the lives growing between them. It's terrifying, she admitted. I don't know how I'm going to manage 4 infants. I don't know if my body can handle the pregnancy. I don't know anything except that they're coming and I'm completely unprepared. We're unprepared, Ethan corrected gently, but we'll figure it out together. I may be terrible at boundaries, but I'm excellent at logistics. Let me help with the overwhelming parts. Amara nodded, surprising herself. Maybe this could work. Maybe they could find a way to be partners in parenting without destroying each other again. I should go, she said, suddenly exhausted. The emotional weight of the day was catching up with her. It's been a long day, and I need to process all of this. Let me drive you home, Ethan offered. It's dark, and you shouldn't be taking the subway this late. She almost refused on principle, but fatigue won out. Okay, thank you. His car was parked around the corner, a sleek black Tesla that screamed wealth and privilege. Amara had forgotten what it was like to move through the world with this kind of ease. Car service, expense accounts, never worrying about the cost of anything. The drive to her apartment in Brooklyn was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they pulled up outside her building, a modest walk-up in a neighborhood that was gentrifying but not yet gentrified, Ethan looked at the structure with barely concealed concern. Is there an elevator? He asked. 4 floors, no elevator, but I manage fine. 4 floors, while pregnant with quadruplets. His jaw tightened. Amara, that's not safe. What if you get put on bed rest? What if… Ethan, she cut him off firmly. This is my home. I like it here. I'm not moving just because you think it's inconvenient. He took a breath, clearly fighting his instinct to argue. You're right. I'm sorry. But will you at least let me know if you need help? With groceries or whatever else requires climbing 4 flights of stairs? It was a reasonable request, even considerate. Amara nodded. I can do that. And Wednesday, 10 a.m., I'll be there. I'll text you the address. She opened the car door, then paused. Ethan, thank you for not completely losing it when I told you. I know this is a lot. It's everything, he said simply. And I meant what I said. I'm going to be better this time. You'll see. Amara climbed the 4 flights to her apartment, her hand pressed against her stomach. Ethan knew. The secret was out, and surprisingly, the sky hadn't fallen. He'd been shocked, controlling, then almost tender. It was more emotional range than she'd seen from him in their entire marriage. Maybe Keisha was right. Maybe people could change. Or maybe this was just the beginning of a whole new kind of disaster. Chapter 2. The medical office of Dr. Sandra Clark occupied a suite in a professional building on the Upper East Side, all neutral colors and soothing artwork designed to calm anxious patients. Amara arrived 15 minutes early for her 14-week appointment, needing time to settle her nerves before Ethan showed up. She hadn't seen him since their conversation at Blue Bottle 5 days ago, though they'd exchanged texts about the appointment logistics. His messages had been respectful, even cautious, like he was worried about saying the wrong thing and being disinvited. The waiting room held 3 other women, all visibly pregnant in ways Amara wasn't yet. She'd started to develop a small bump that could be explained as bloating, but nothing that screamed quadruplets. Amara Powell? The nurse appeared in the doorway with a chart. You can come back now. Is your partner joining us? He should be here soon, Amara said, following the nurse down the hallway. We can start without him if needed. The exam room was familiar from last week's visit. Same ultrasound machine, same examination table with its crinkly paper covering. The nurse took her vitals, weighing her and noting that she'd gained 3 pounds since last week. Normal for multiples, the nurse assured her. You'll want to aim for 45 to 50 pounds total by delivery. Dr. Clark will discuss nutrition guidelines with you today. 50 pounds. Amara tried to imagine her 5'6" frame carrying that kind of weight, tried to picture what 4 babies would do to her body. The thought was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. A knock on the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Ethan stepped in, slightly breathless, his tie loosened and hair wind-tossed. I'm sorry I'm late. Emergency call from the Singapore office. He stopped short, taking in the clinical setting, the examination table, the reality of where they were and why. Is everything okay? Have you started? Did I miss anything important? Vitals only, the nurse said with a professional smile. Dr. Clark will be in shortly. You must be Dad? Dad. The word hung in the air between them. Ethan's expression shifted through several emotions before landing on something tentatively proud. Yes, he said. I'm Dad. The nurse left them alone in the exam room. Ethan set down his briefcase and shrugged out of his suit jacket, hanging it carefully on the back of the chair. The gesture was so familiar, he'd always been meticulous about his clothes, that it made Amara's chest ache with complicated nostalgia. How are you feeling? He asked, standing awkwardly by the chair like he wasn't sure whether he was allowed to come closer. Tired, nauseous, terrified. Amara managed a weak smile. So, Normal, I guess. I've been reading, Ethan said, pulling his phone from his pocket, about quadruplet pregnancies, the medical risks, the statistics, what to expect. Did you know that the average gestation for quads is 31 weeks? Dr. Clark mentioned that might be the goal, yes. 31 weeks, that's 9 weeks premature. They'll need NICU time, specialized care. He was spiraling into logistics mode, his voice taking on that clipped efficiency she remembered from their marriage. We should start looking at hospitals with level 4 neonatal intensive care units. There are only a few in the city that can handle. Ethan, Amara interrupted gently. Breathe, we're not solving everything today. He stopped mid-sentence, visibly pulling himself back from the edge of overwhelm. You're right. Sorry. I tend to research things to death when I'm scared. You're scared? Terrified, he admitted, echoing her word. What if something goes wrong? What if I mess this up like I messed up our marriage? What if... A knock interrupted his spiral. Dr. Clark entered with a warm smile, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing her customary white coat over purple scrubs. Amara, good to see you. And you must be Ethan. I'm Dr. Sandra Clark. She shook his hand professionally. Thanks for coming today. It's always helpful to have both parents involved from the beginning. Both parents. The phrase seemed to settle something in Ethan's expression. Dr. Clark settled onto her rolling stool and pulled up the ultrasound images from the previous week on her computer screen. So, we're here for a 14-week check. This is an important appointment because we'll be doing a more detailed anatomy scan, checking nuchal translucency for each baby, and discussing your care plan going forward. She turned to Ethan. Amara mentioned the relationship is complicated, but I want to make sure you understand the scope of what we're dealing with. Quadruplet pregnancies are rare, about 1 in 700,000 births. They're automatically classified as high risk, with significant concerns about preterm labor, gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, and postpartum complications. Amara watched the color drain from Ethan's face as Dr. Clark outlined the risks with professional thoroughness. But, the doctor continued, Amara is young, healthy, and all 4 babies are developing normally so far. We have excellent protocols for managing multiple pregnancies, and our success rates keep improving. The key is vigilance and following care guidelines closely. What can I do? Ethan asked. How can I help reduce the risks? Support, Dr. Clark said simply. Stress is a major factor in pregnancy complications. Amara needs to feel supported, not pressured. Help with practical matters, nutrition, rest, transportation to appointments, and most importantly, be patient. This pregnancy will be physically demanding in ways that are hard to imagine. She turned back to Amara. Ready to see your babies? The ultrasound gel was cold against Amara's exposed stomach. Ethan moved closer, standing beside the examination table with his eyes fixed on the screen as Dr. Clark moved the wand across her skin. 4 forms appeared, much clearer than last week's images. No longer just sacs and heartbeats, but actual baby shapes. Heads, bodies, limbs in various stages of development. Here's baby A, Dr. Clark narrated, zooming in on the largest form, in the best position for delivery, measuring right on track, strong heartbeat at 157 beats per minute. The sound filled the room, rapid, rhythmic, undeniable proof of life. Amara felt tears prick her eyes as she always did at this sound, but this time she wasn't alone in her reaction. Ethan's hand found hers, his grip tight enough to be almost painful. Baby B, also looking excellent, 162 beats per minute. Another heartbeat joined the first in symphony. Baby C, 158, and baby D, our smallest but still within normal parameters, 154. 4 heartbeats, 4 lives, 4 chances at the family they'd both wanted but had been too broken to create together. Oh my God, Ethan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. They're real. I mean, I knew they were real, but seeing them? It changes things, Amara said softly, understanding exactly what he meant. Dr. Clark continued the examination, taking measurements and capturing images. She pointed out tiny hands and feet, spines and profiles, the incredible detail visible at 14 weeks. Everything looks textbook perfect, she said finally, wiping the gel from Amara's stomach. All 4 babies are measuring appropriately. Nuchal translucency looks normal for all of them, and there are no red flags. So she's okay? Ethan asked. They're all okay. For now, yes. But I want to see Amara weekly from this point forward. We'll monitor growth rates, amniotic fluid levels, and cervical length to watch for early labor signs. At 20 weeks, if everything still looks good, we'll start discussing delivery plans. What about work? Amara asked. I'm a consultant, mostly from home, but I do have to attend some in-person meetings. Through 20 weeks should be fine, with modifications. No heavy lifting, stay hydrated, rest when you're tired. After 20 weeks, we'll reassess, but I'm likely going to recommend limiting physical activity significantly. By 25 weeks, I'll want you on modified bed rest. Modified bed rest. Amara had read about this, essentially being confined to a bed or couch for weeks or months to reduce the risk of preterm labor. The thought of losing that much independence was staggering. I can work from home, Ethan said immediately. I can set up an office in my apartment, be available whenever she needs something. I have my own apartment, Amara reminded him. A fourth-floor walk-up, he countered, without an elevator. How's that going to work when you're on bed rest? Dr. Clark looked between them with the expression of someone who'd witnessed countless couple dynamics during pregnancy. This is a conversation you two need to have privately, but I will say that practical considerations matter. Bed rest in a building without an elevator becomes problematic, especially for emergency situations. She stood, preparing to leave them alone. I'm going to have my scheduler set up weekly appointments for the next month. Amara, here are prescriptions for the specialized prenatal vitamins and an anti-nausea medication if you need it. And both of you, she looked at them seriously, figure out your living situation sooner rather than later. Stress about logistics isn't good for anyone. After she left, Amara sat up slowly, her hand pressed against her stomach where 4 babies were somehow fitting inside her still relatively small frame. You're not moving in with me, she said before Ethan could start the argument. I wasn't going to suggest that. He paused. I was going to suggest we find a place together, something neutral, ground floor, close to the hospital, enough space for 4 nurseries. Ethan, hear me out. He held up his hand. I'm not talking about getting back together. I'm talking about practical co-parenting. You need help, whether you want to admit it or not. I want to be present, not just visiting on weekends. And 4 infants are going to require more space than either of our current apartments provide. Amara wanted to refuse on principle, wanted to maintain her independence, prove she could handle this alone, but the practical part of her brain, the part that had spent 3 years learning to navigate Ethan's logic, recognized he wasn't entirely wrong. I need to think about it, she said. This is all happening very fast. Of course. Take your time. But his expression was already calculating, already planning. In the meantime, let me at least help with appointments. I can drive you, wait with you, whatever you need. You have a company to run. I have vice presidents who can handle things. This is more important. He picked up the ultrasound images Dr. Clark had printed, studying them with an expression of wonder. Can I keep one of these? The request was so unexpectedly vulnerable that Amara's resistance softened. Take 2. 1 for your office, 1 for home. Thank you. He tucked them carefully into his briefcase, treating them like precious documents. And Amara, thank you for letting me be here today, for including me. I know I don't deserve it after how I treated you, but I'm grateful. They left the doctor's office together, stepping out into the bright spring afternoon. The city rushed around them, taxis honking, people hurrying past, the constant energy of New York that never stopped. Let me buy you lunch, Ethan said. There's a place around the corner that has excellent soup. You used to love their butternut squash. Amara should have said no, should have maintained distance, but she was hungry and tired and still processing the reality of 4 babies, and the thought of eating alone in her apartment felt unbearably lonely. Okay, she agreed, but just lunch, and you're not allowed to bring up living arrangements again today. Deal. He smiled, and for a moment, he looked like the man she'd fallen in love with, warm, charming, genuinely happy to be in her presence. They walked to the restaurant in comfortable silence, and Amara tried not to think about how easy it would be to fall back into old patterns, to let Ethan's certainty override her own judgment. The quadruplets had bound them together in ways divorce couldn't sever, but that didn't mean they were meant to be together, even if her treacherous heart kept suggesting otherwise. The next 2 weeks fell into an unexpected rhythm. Ethan attended every appointment, arrived on time, asked thoughtful questions, and never once tried to override Amara's decisions. He sent her articles about quad pregnancies with notes like, "Found this interesting, but ignore if it's overwhelming." He had groceries delivered to her apartment when he noticed her struggling with the stairs. He was, in short, being everything she'd needed during their marriage and never gotten. It was disorienting and wonderful and terrifying all at once. "He's being too perfect," Amara told Keisha over dinner at Keisha's brownstone in Fort Greene. "It's making me nervous." "Maybe he's actually changed," Keisha suggested, passing Amara another helping of her famous mac and cheese. "People can grow, you know, especially when faced with something as life-changing as quadruplets. Or maybe he's just on his best behavior until I let my guard down." Keisha's husband, Derek, looked up from where he was helping their 15-year-old son with homework at the kitchen table. "For what it's worth, Ethan called me last week." Both women turned to stare at him. "What?" Amara's voice was sharp. "Why would he call you?" "He wanted advice on how to support you without being controlling. He said he knows he has a problem with wanting to manage everything, and he's trying to learn better boundaries. I told him about when Keisha was pregnant with Marcus, how I had to learn that helping wasn't the same as taking over." Amara didn't know what to do with this information. The idea of Ethan Rothwell asking someone else for advice was so foreign to the man she'd been married to that it felt like evidence of an alternate universe. "He's really trying," Derek continued. "I'm not saying you should trust him immediately or anything, but maybe give him a chance to prove he's different." Later, after dinner, Amara and Keisha sat on the back porch while Derek handled bedtime routines inside. The early May evening was perfect, warm but not humid, the sky turning purple and gold as the sun set behind the Brooklyn rooftops. "I'm scared," Amara admitted, "not just about the babies, though I'm terrified about that too. I'm scared that I want to believe he's changed, that I'm looking for reasons to let him back in because I don't want to do this alone." "Would that be so terrible?" Keisha asked gently. "Wanting help? Wanting partnership? You don't have to do everything yourself to prove you're strong. But what if I let him in, and he goes back to being the Ethan who made me feel small, who blamed me for everything? I barely survived leaving him the first time." "Then you'll survive leaving him again, but stronger this time, with 4 babies and the knowledge that you can rebuild your life from nothing." Keisha squeezed her hand. "You're not the same woman who married him, Amara. You're not even the same woman who signed those divorce papers. You've been through fire and you came out forged steel." Amara leaned her head on her best friend's shoulder, grateful beyond words for this woman who'd stood by her through everything. "What would I do without you?" "Probably make bad decisions and eat terrible food. It's what white people do when left unsupervised." Amara laughed despite her heavy mood. "Ethan's white. Does that mean the babies will have his terrible casserole instincts?" "We'll teach them better. That's what black aunties are for, saving half-white babies from unseasoned food and questionable life choices." They sat together as the evening deepened, talking about baby names and nursery colors and the 1,000 practical concerns that came with quadruplets. And if Amara's phone buzzed with a text from Ethan asking if she needed anything, and if she smiled when she read it, Keisha was kind enough not to comment. At 16 weeks, Amara woke at 3 a.m. to her phone ringing. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. "What's wrong?" she answered immediately, heart pounding. "Is someone hurt?" "I'm sorry, I know it's late, but I couldn't sleep." His voice sounded strange, raw. "I keep thinking about how I almost missed this, how if that night hadn't happened, if we hadn't, I would never have known what it felt like to see their heartbeats, to hear you say their names." "Ethan, have you been drinking?" "No, I'm just—" He paused. "I'm sitting in what used to be my office, looking at the ultrasound pictures, and I'm trying to imagine them, what they'll look like, whether they'll have your eyes or your smile, if they'll be healthy, if I'll be a good father, and I'm terrified, Amara. I'm more scared than I've ever been in my life." Amara sat up in bed, fully awake now. This vulnerability was so unlike the Ethan she'd known, the man who projected confidence even when he had no idea what he was doing. "I'm scared too," she said softly. Every night I wake up and check to make sure I can still feel them moving. Every appointment I'm convinced Dr. Clark is going to find something wrong. It's constant fear. How do you live with it? I don't have a choice. They're coming whether I'm ready or not. She pulled her knees up, resting her hand on the small bump that was finally starting to be visible. But also, Ethan, I think being scared means we care. It means we understand how precious this is. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. How to be what you need, what they'll need. I don't have a model for being a present father. My dad was always working, always distant. And you're so naturally warm, so good with people. I'm not like that. You don't have to be like me. You just have to be consistent and honest and willing to try. She hesitated, then added, You've been doing well so far. The last 2 weeks, showing up to appointments, respecting my boundaries. That matters. Really? He sounded almost pathetically hopeful. I'm not screwing it up? Not yet, she smiled despite herself, but call me at 3 a.m. again and I might reconsider. Noted, I'll restrict my existential crises to reasonable hours. He paused. Amara, have you thought any more about the living situation? She had. Constantly. Dr. Clark's warning about bed rest kept echoing in her mind, along with the reality that 4 newborns would require more space and help than her small apartment could provide. I'm still thinking, she said carefully, but I'm open to looking at options, not moving into your place, she added quickly, but maybe something neutral. I'll start researching tomorrow. Ground floor, 2 bedrooms for you and 1 for me, close to Mount Sinai. I'll send you options and you can tell me what you think. 2 bedrooms for me? You'll need an office and a bedroom. I can sleep on a couch in the living room. The babies will probably be in your room anyway for the first few months. It was so thoroughly planned, so typically Ethan, that she should have been annoyed. Instead, she found it oddly comforting. He was thinking ahead, anticipating needs, trying to make space for what she required. Send me the options, she agreed. We'll talk about it at lunch this week. Thank you. And Amara, I'm sorry for waking you, but I'm glad we talked. Me too. Now go to sleep, Ethan. You sound exhausted. After they hung up, Amara lay awake for another hour, her hand on her stomach, feeling the tiny flutters that Dr. Clark said were the babies starting to move. 4 lives, 4 heartbeats, 4 reasons to try to make this impossible situation work, and 1 very complicated ex-husband who kept surprising her just when she thought she had him figured out. Chapter 3. The apartment Ethan found was in the West Village, a ground-floor unit in a pre-war building with 12-foot ceilings and enough space for 4 nurseries without feeling cramped. It had exposed brick, hardwood floors and 3 bedrooms plus an office. It was also completely out of Amara's price range, but Ethan waved away her concerns. I'm covering the lease, he said as they toured the empty space at 18 weeks. Call it child support if that makes you feel better. Ethan. 4 babies, Amara. 4. We're going to need help. Nurses, nannies, whoever. We need space for all of that, plus room for your grandmother when she visits, plus the medical equipment Dr. Clark said we'll need for premature multiples. This isn't about money. It's about logistics. He was right, and she hated how often he was right these days. The apartment was perfect, close to Mount Sinai, close to Keisha, with an elevator and a doorman, and enough space that she and Ethan could have separate areas while still being available for nighttime feedings. 2-year lease, she said finally. That gives us time to figure out long-term arrangements. Agreed. He looked around the empty living room with an expression she couldn't quite read. We'll make this work, Amara, I promise. They moved in a week later. Ethan hired professional movers, organized everything with military precision, and somehow managed not to be overbearing about any of it. He took the smallest bedroom, insisting Amara have the master with its ensuite bathroom. He set up his office in what would eventually become one of the nurseries. He grocery shopped based on her pregnancy cravings and learned to cook simple meals when she was too tired. It was everything she'd wanted during their marriage, appearing now when they weren't even together anymore. This is so weird, she told Keisha during one of their weekly coffee dates. At 19 weeks, Amara was definitely showing, her stomach rounding in ways that made strangers smile knowingly. We're living together, but not together, co-parenting before the babies even arrive, and he's being so consider it. Maybe he learned something from the divorce, Keisha suggested. Or maybe becoming a father is changing him. Or maybe it's temporary, and once the babies arrive, he'll go back to being controlling and impossible. Always so optimistic. But Keisha's expression was gentle. What's really bothering you? Because I don't think it's the living situation. Amara took a careful sip of her decaf latte before answering. I think I'm falling for him again. Or maybe I never stopped, and that terrifies me because I remember what it felt like when loving him wasn't enough. But you're different now. He's different. Maybe it could work this time. Or maybe I'm fooling myself because I'm pregnant and scared, and he's there every day being exactly what I need. Keisha reached across the table to squeeze her hand. You don't have to make any decisions right now. You're allowed to just exist in this weird in-between space, see what happens. What happened was that the in-between space started to feel increasingly complicated. At 20 weeks, when Dr. Clark confirmed all 4 babies were growing well and pronounced the pregnancy remarkably unremarkable for quads, Ethan took Amara to dinner at the restaurant where they had had their first date. I'm not trying to recreate anything, he said as they were seated. I just remembered you loved their risotto, and I thought you might want something other than the takeout we've been living on. The meal was lovely. Good food, easy conversation, the kind of comfortable companionship they'd had at the beginning before everything got complicated. Ethan asked about her work, listened when she talked about the challenges of consulting while pregnant, and told her about the community development project in the Bronx that was actually succeeding. The first affordable units will be ready next month, he said, something like pride in his voice, and they're already fully leased to local residents. You were right about the priorities. Community first, profit second, actually works. Did it kill you to admit that? Amara teased. Only a little. He smiled at her, and the expression transformed his usually serious face. But you've always been right about the important things. I was just too stubborn to listen. On the walk home, Ethan insisted on taking it slow, stopping frequently for Amara to rest. They passed a bookstore that was having a children's book sale. Without discussing it, they both wandered in, drawn to the displays of colorful picture books and board books for babies. 4 of everything, Amara murmured, picking up a copy of Goodnight Moon. How do people afford quadruplets? We'll manage. Ethan grabbed 4 copies of several books. They should each have their own, even identical stories. They're individuals, not a unit. The thoughtfulness of that statement made Amara's throat tight. She watched him select books carefully, reading back covers and checking illustrations, completely absorbed in the task of choosing the right stories for children who didn't exist yet. This version of Ethan, attentive, humble, genuinely trying, was almost harder to resist than the charming man she'd fallen for initially. Because this version knew her, had seen her at her worst, and was still showing up every day. Back at the apartment, they spent an hour arranging the books on newly installed shelves in what would become the main nursery. 4 cribs were on order, along with 4 changing tables and enough baby equipment to stock a small daycare. I keep forgetting they're all coming at once, Amara said, sitting carefully on the rocking chair Ethan's mother had sent. In my mind, it's still abstract. 4 babies. But eventually, there will be 4 actual humans who need to be fed and changed and held simultaneously. We'll have help, Ethan said, settling on the floor beside her chair. Night nurses for the first few months at least, and my mother has already volunteered to come stay for a few weeks. Your mother hates me. She doesn't hate you, she was just disappointed about the divorce. She actually really liked you, thought you were good for me. He looked up at her, his expression vulnerable. She was right. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Amara's hand moved to his shoulder, almost without conscious thought, and Ethan leaned into the touch like he'd been starving for it. Ethan, she said softly, what are we doing? I don't know. His hand came up to cover hers, but I know I don't want to stop. He stood slowly, careful not to startle her, and pulled her gently to her feet. At 20 weeks pregnant with quadruplets, Amara was rounded and soft in ways she'd never been before, and she felt suddenly self-conscious about her changing body. But the way Ethan was looking at her had nothing to do with judgment. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. You're beautiful, he said quietly. You've always been beautiful, but like this, he shook his head. I don't have words for it. I'm huge and awkward, and I waddle when I walk. You're carrying our children, 4 of them. You're a miracle. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and different from the desperate passion of their last night together before the divorce. This was tender, reverent, asking permission with every movement. Amara kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, 6 months of complicated feelings pouring into the contact. They'd been circling this moment since he'd come to that first appointment, since they'd moved in together, since they'd started rebuilding something in the wreckage of their marriage. We should talk about this, she whispered against his mouth. Figure out what it means. Later, Ethan murmured, kissing along her jaw. We'll talk later. Right now, I just need this. Need you. He led her to the master bedroom, moving slowly, giving her every opportunity to stop. But Amara didn't want to stop, didn't want to be reasonable or cautious or any of the things she'd been trying to be for the last 5 months. They made love carefully, Ethan hyper-aware of her pregnant body, constantly asking if she was comfortable, if anything hurt, if she needed to stop. It was sweet and frustrating and completely different from their marriage, when sex had often felt like another area where Ethan tried to maintain control. This felt like partnership, like 2 people learning each other again with patience and genuine care. Afterward, they lay tangled together in bed, Ethan's hand spread across Amara's swollen stomach. They're moving, he said, wonder in his voice. I can feel them. That's baby A, I think. The most active. Amara covered his hand with hers. Dr. Clark says it's normal for one to be more mobile than the others. What if I'm terrible at this? Ethan asked suddenly. What if I can't tell them apart, or I mess up their schedules, or I don't know what they need? Then you'll learn, like every other parent. She turned to face him. But Ethan, we need to talk about what just happened, about what this means. I know. He pulled her closer. I know we need to define this, figure out boundaries. But can we just be for tonight? Can we figure it out tomorrow? Amara knew they shouldn't postpone the conversation, knew that avoiding difficult discussions was part of what had destroyed their marriage. But she was tired and happy and feeling safer than she had in months, and tomorrow seemed far enough away. Okay, she agreed. Tomorrow? Tomorrow turned into several tomorrows. They didn't discuss what their relationship was, didn't put labels. On the way, Ethan now slept in her bed most nights, or the casual intimacy that had developed between them. They just existed in a comfortable present, preparing for the babies and building something new in the spaces between. At 24 weeks, Dr. Clark ordered modified bed rest. All 4 babies were still growing well, but Amara's cervix was shortening, a sign that preterm labor might be approaching. Nothing vigorous, the doctor said firmly. You can move around the apartment, but no stairs, no leaving the house except for appointments, no stress. We're trying to make it to at least 30 weeks, preferably 32. The restrictions chafed immediately. Amara had always been active, always moving, and being confined felt like punishment. But Ethan stepped up in ways that made the situation bearable. He worked from home full-time, setting up his office in the nursery so he was always close by. He brought her meals, helped her to the bathroom, read to her from novels when she was too restless to focus. This must be boring for you, Amara said one afternoon, watching him respond to emails while sitting beside her bed. Being with you is never boring. He looked up with a slight smile. Besides, I like this, taking care of you, being needed. You always needed to be needed. You just had a funny way of showing it. Yeah, well, I'm learning better. He closed his laptop and shifted to face her fully. Amara, I know we've been avoiding the big conversation, but I think we need to talk about what happens after the babies arrive. Her heart sank. Are you ending this? What? No, the opposite. He took her hand. I want to make this official. Move toward being a real family, not just co-parents sharing space. Ethan, I'm not proposing, he added quickly, reading her expression. I know we're not there yet, and I need to earn back your trust, but I want you to know my intentions. That I'm not doing this just because of the babies. I'm doing it because I want you. Because these 6 months have reminded me of everything I loved about us and shown me what we could be if we both tried harder. Amara felt tears prick her eyes, hormone-driven and genuine all at once. I want that too, but I'm scared. What if we fall back into old patterns? What if the stress of 4 infants destroys what we're building? Then we'll go to therapy. We'll communicate better. We'll ask for help when we need it. He squeezed her hand. But I'm not giving up on us again, Amara. I did that once, and it was the worst mistake of my life. Okay, she whispered. Okay, we'll try. Properly this time, with all the messy communication and boundary setting we should have done the first time. I can do messy communication. He leaned forward to kiss her softly. I've been practicing. At 28 weeks, Amara woke in the middle of the night to unmistakable cramping. She lay still for a moment, timing the sensations, hoping they would fade. They didn't. Ethan, she shook. Him awake. Something's wrong. He was instantly alert, his years of corporate crisis management kicking in. Within minutes, they were in a car headed to Mount Sinai, Amara breathing through contractions while Ethan called ahead to notify Dr. Clark. The hospital was too bright, too loud, too real. Nurses moved efficiently, getting Amara into a gown, hooking her up to monitors that showed 4 heartbeats and unmistakable contractions. 28 weeks is too early, Amara said, gripping Ethan's hand. They're not ready. Their lungs aren't developed enough. We're going to stop the labor, Dr. Clark said, arriving with her usual calm confidence. Medication, steroids for their lungs, complete bed rest. You'll be staying here until delivery, however long that takes. The next 48 hours were terrifying. Medication to stop contractions made Amara feel jittery and strange. Steroid shots to develop the baby's lungs made her joints ache. But slowly, the contractions eased and the crisis passed. You bought us some time, Dr. Clark said on day 3. But you're not going home. You're staying here on strict bed rest and we'll be monitoring continuously. Every day we can keep them in is crucial. Ethan barely left her side. He worked from her hospital room, slept in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed, and advocated fiercely whenever medical staff suggested something that worried him. You don't have to stay every night, Amara told him one evening. You need sleep in a real bed. I need to be here. He moved from the chair to sit carefully on the edge of her bed. What if something happens and I'm not here? Nothing's going to happen. I'm surrounded by nurses and monitors and medical equipment. But what if? His voice cracked slightly. I can't lose you, Amara. I can't lose any of you. I already wasted 3 years of our marriage being an asshole. I'm not wasting another minute. She pulled him down beside her, mindful of the monitoring equipment, and held him while he finally let himself fall apart. Strong, controlled Ethan Rothwell, crying into her shoulder about all his fears and regrets. We're going to be okay, she promised, hoping it was true. All 6 of us, we're going to make it through this. 32 weeks felt like a miracle. Then 33, 34. Each day Amara stayed pregnant was a victory, measured in improved outcomes and better chances for the babies. At 34 weeks and 3 days, Dr. Clark made the decision. Your cervix is dilating despite medication, she said, reviewing the latest exam, and baby D is showing some signs of distress. I think it's time. We'll schedule a C-section for tomorrow morning. Tomorrow. After all the waiting, all the fear, it was suddenly real and imminent. 4 babies. Tomorrow. Ethan held her hand through the pre-op preparations, through the consents and the discussions about NICU stays and the very small risks that came with premature quadruplets at 34 weeks. I'm terrified, Amara admitted the night before surgery. What if something goes wrong? What if I'm not ready to be a mother? No one's ever ready. He brushed hair back from her face. But you're going to be amazing. You're already amazing. You've kept them safe for 8 months. You've done the hard part. Now we just have to meet them. The morning of delivery arrived with surreal clarity. Ethan in scrubs. The bright lights of the OR. Dr. Clark's calm voice talking her through each step as the epidural took effect. First baby, Dr. Clark announced. It's a girl. The cry was thin and reedy, but perfect. Amara tried to see over the drape but could only catch glimpses as the NICU team assessed her first daughter. Second baby, another girl. More crying, higher pitch this time. Third baby, a boy. And fourth baby, our smallest girl. 4 cries, 4 voices, 4 lives that had been abstract concepts suddenly real and breathing and being whisked away to warming beds before Amara could even see them properly. They're all breathing on their own, Dr. Clark reported. Good initial APGAR scores. The NICU team will do a full assessment, but this is going as well as we could hope." Ethan was crying, Amara realized. Her stoic ex-husband had tears streaming down his face as he looked at the 4 tiny infants being examined by the neonatal team. "They're so small," he whispered. "So perfect. Amara, we made 4 humans." She wanted to laugh and cry simultaneously. We did. We actually did it. The babies spent 2 weeks in the NICU getting stronger, learning to regulate their body temperature, and figuring out how to eat. Amara and Ethan practically lived at the hospital, taking turns doing skin-to-skin contact, learning to change tiny diapers and feed through impossibly small bottles. They'd chosen names carefully. Gabrielle Diane, after Amara's mother, Eleanor Patricia, after Ethan's mother, Benjamin Derek, after Keisha's husband who'd been so supportive, and Sophia Grace, because Amara had always loved the name. 4 perfect babies, 3 girls and 1 boy. 4 chances at getting everything right. Patricia Rothwell arrived the day before they came home, moving into the apartment with determination and surprisingly little judgment. "I was wrong about many things during your marriage," she told Amara privately while Ethan was at the hospital. "I should have supported you more, should have told my son he was being an idiot. But I'm here now, and I'm going to help however I can." The first night home was chaos. 4 babies waking at different times, needing to be fed, changed, comforted. Amara and Ethan stumbled through it with Patricia's help, surviving on adrenaline and determination. But slowly, painfully, they found a rhythm. Night nurses for the first 8 weeks, then gradually taking over more responsibilities themselves. Amara's grandmother came to visit and stayed a month. Keisha organized a meal train through their friend group. Derek taught Ethan how to properly swaddle a squirming infant. At 6 weeks postpartum, in the quiet moments after a 3 a.m. feeding when all 4 babies were finally asleep, Ethan found Amara in the nursery just watching them breathe. "I can't believe they're ours," she whispered, "that we get to keep them." "You were incredible during the pregnancy," Ethan said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "But watching you with them now, you're everything I hoped you'd be and more." "We're good at this," Amara sounded surprised. "Together, we're actually good at this. We're good at a lot of things together. Took us a while to figure that out." She turned in his arms, studying his face. He looked exhausted. They both did, but happier than she'd ever seen him. More settled, more himself. "Ask me," she said suddenly. "Ask you what?" "What you wanted to ask 6 months ago, before the babies, before everything got complicated." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that looked like fear. "Amara, ask me, Ethan." He pulled back slightly, reaching into his pocket. When he opened his hand, a simple platinum band with a single diamond sat on his palm. Different from the elaborate engagement ring he'd given her the first time. Better. "I bought this the day after you told me about the pregnancy," he admitted. "Kept it with me ever since, waiting for the right moment. But there's never a perfect time, is there? There's just now, with 4 babies sleeping in the next room, and both of us exhausted, and you with spit up on your shoulder and me needing a shower. This is real life, Amara. Messy and imperfect and nothing like I planned, and I love it. I love you. I love our family. Will you marry me? Again? Properly this time?" "Yes," she said, not needing to think about it. "Yes. But I'm keeping my name, and we're doing couples therapy, and you don't get to make unilateral decisions about the kids' education or activities or anything else." "Agreed. Any other conditions?" "Just one." She kissed him softly. "Don't ever let me forget that I'm strong enough to do this alone, even though I'm grateful I don't have to." "Deal." He slipped the ring onto her finger. "I love you, Amara Powell. Thank you for giving me another chance. For giving us another chance. I love you too, even when I didn't want to." A cry interrupted the moment, Sophia waking for her next feeding. Soon all 4 would be up, demanding attention in their own unique ways. "Ready?" Ethan asked, taking her hand. "For which part? The feeding? The diaper changes? The next 18 years?" "All of it." Amara squeezed his hand, looking at their 4 perfect, demanding, exhausting children. "Yeah, I'm ready. We're ready." And somehow, impossibly, it was true.